Hello and welcome to the Student Hub Live, the Open University's live online interactive platform. My name's Karen Foley and I'm a lecturer here at the Open University, and in this special broadcast we're looking at the topic of studying in prison. And I'd like to welcome you to the Open University and also introduce you to some of the team who look after students in secure environments. We'd like to give you a bit of a flavour about what it's like to be an OU student and give you some tips for managing your study, and also, most importantly, some ideas on what support is available and where you might go for extra help. I'm joined by Chris, Stephen and Sean, who are members of the team, and we're going to talk about a wide range of areas that we think will be of real interest to you if you're thinking about studying with the Open University. We'll talk about how to get started, what being an Open University student entails, what sort of support you can expect from the Open University, and then, last but not least, we'll focus on digital study. So first, Chris, if I can talk to you about how students might get started, what should they do?
The first thing that they'd need to do is go and speak to the education department at their prison. They're the people that know the OU and what it's about, and they'll also know the processes and procedures to get them studying with us.
So they might have an education manager, mightn't they?
That's right, yeah. Most prisons will have sort of an education manager or a dedicated OU contact there who will be able to tell them everything sort of OU related.
Brilliant. And there are three broad stages to the processes, aren't there? Firstly, there's deciding which module you want to study, which I think can perhaps be one of the most challenging areas.
Yeah, that's it. We have a sort of specific prospectus for our prison students that contains all the modules and all the qualifications that we offer. So the first point of call really is to look at that and to see, is there a subject of interest that you want to do, something that takes your fancy. But we also have a Steps to Success prospectus as well.
And you've got copies of those here with us, so I wonder if we might just show people those. So the Steps to Success, what does that cover?
So Steps to Success, this is our access modules. These are designed so if you've not studied sort of recently, or you're not sure about sort of what OU study's about, they're a really good way of sort of learning and sort of developing your study skills, building confidence, and it's sort of a low-risk way of dipping your toes into the OU study.
Yeah, I'm chair of one of the access modules, and we teach a lot of skills and give students a real broad flavour of some of the subjects that we study. So we meet a lot of students who are studying in prison who get a lot of value from those modules, and I find it really helpful to sort of see if studying at the Open University is something that they'd like to do. Yeah,
that's right, and with the access modules as well, for our prison students, they can get that funded through the Prisoners Education Trust. So they don't have to take out a student loan or pay for it themselves. So it's a really, really good way to get started with OU study.
Brilliant. And then, of course, we've got the prospectus, which starts at level 1.
Yeah, this is our sort of main prospectus. As I say, this contains the actual sort of degree qualifications and then the modules that make up those qualifications as well.
Brilliant. So important to have an idea about that trajectory that you might get moving forwards. But as you say, they can speak to somebody and reserve a place, most importantly, because there are two main intakes throughout the year for Open University study.
That's right. The first major intake is October, which sort of falls in line with traditional university study. But we also have a February intake as well. And our access modules that we've talked about already, and if you're beginning your OU studies, you've got those options of starting one of those two start points.
So well in advance of those dates, you need to reserve your place, and then the next important step is to secure funding.
Yep. We're happy for you to study, but we're going to need you to pay for it. But in terms of funding, you can get a student loan. We've discussed Prisoners Education Trust. So there are options out there to help pay and to get you that degree.
Brilliant. And then you need to confirm your registration as well. So in addition to registering, getting funding, then there's that final step of actually confirming that this is something you'd like to go ahead with.
Yeah, the confirmation is really sort of telling us that you've got your funding in place. So when you go to that first step and make a reservation, our registration team will send you the relevant application forms so that you've got all the correct paperwork and and your education department know what needs to be done. And then that final step, is confirming that your funding is in place and you're ready to go and you're ready for that October or February start.
And then it's about waiting for the materials to arrive. Now, studying with the Open University, depending, of course, on what you're doing, depends on what you'll get. So some courses will have a book, some will have a virtual learning environment. And depending, of course, on what you're doing, depends on what will be sent to you. So tell us what people can expect and when they might get it.
So the materials, they're normally sent sort of 1 to 2 weeks before the module start date. For all of our prison students, they'll receive an offline pack, which is sort of printed version of all the materials that are available digitally. In addition to that, there'll be course books, there may be some DVDs, and all of our students as well will be given sort of a login to access Virtual Campus, which is your materials in a sort of an online secure way through that platform.
Excellent. And Ruth will be talking through us with all of that a bit later. That's been brilliant. Thank you very much, Chris. Stephen, you are an OU student in addition to being one of the team, so you'll know exactly what it's like studying at a distance. What are some of the challenges that anybody might face if they're presented with material that week in, week out they've got to do and send their assessment in? How does it work being an OU student?
Well, you've got to plan your studies. You're working independently. You get the study plan at the start of the course. That goes through what you need to be studying week on week. It tells you what deadlines you may have as well. So effectively it's planning for that week and also planning for the future, making sure that you know what you've got to do, you know where the things are, you know what you need to cover. For students in secure environments, it's more important they plan their week in more detail, and they may not have access to IT readily, so they may have particular times when they need to cover certain areas of work, like watch videos, type up assignments. So they may need to use their time strategically, so plan for what they're doing in IT sessions in advance, rather than wait till they get to the IT session and then think, what do I need to do now? So effectively it's about looking at the planner, looking at it a weekly basis, but thinking ahead about what you need to do and, effectively using your time to the best of its ability.
And we'll look at the study planner a little bit later in detail, but broadly, I mean, one of the benefits of the OU being a distance learning provider is that things are very structured. You get an idea each week about what you're supposed to do. You're going to read this, do this, submit this assignment, etc. So there's already that structure. But as you say, it might be important to be a bit more strategic so that you don't end up in the computer lab thinking, oh, where do I start this assignment? Perhaps it's about scribbling some notes beforehand or really thinking about how and when you might study, which is a challenge for all OU students.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone needs to look at what work they need to do and how they can do it best, and plan when they're going to study and have effectively a study plan really, away from what they need to do. So effectively making their notes, preparing for what they need to do, looking at the resources, looking at the materials, being clear that they've got all the materials as well. That's a big thing that our students need to do, is when they get the pack, as Chris mentioned about the standard pack and the offline pack, make sure that they've got all those resources. They don't want to wait until that week and then find that key book isn't there and request it, because it might take a few days for it to get sent out at least. So effectively, if they check their contents checklist with their materials at the start of the course when they arrive, they can plan ahead, make sure they've got everything they need, they know where it is, and then basically they've got everything set to study, and then they've got to plan where they study and effectively use it best they can. If they're studying in the cell, they might want to do certain types of work. If they're studying in the library, they might want to write an essay. If they're studying in the IT room, they might want to type up the essay. So effectively it's using the resources available to the best advantage of what they can.
Absolutely, and planning it really, really carefully. Now, in your experience as an OU student, what is some of the best ways to make use of time in terms of things like note-taking, reading, watching audio-visual material, all of those things that students are often thinking, I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to be doing when I'm doing that. A lot of them will just end up highlighting things, thinking everything is important, because a lot of it is about being selective and prioritising what you need to do. This is one of the challenges, isn't it? So what advice might you give students generally?
With myself, with my own studies, I generally read through, I make general notes alongside what I'm reading. I'll go over them after each chapter or section. I'll highlight certain sections in the book. I generally don't highlight too much because you can get a bit carried away thinking this is important, and you look back and you've got a page that's virtually coloured in. So and then it gets harder to go back to when you're trying to revise because every point's a key point, so it can get a little bit daunting at that point. So I try and make my note taking like one note per paragraph, keep it like that, keep it structured, keep it in a fashion that works for me. Everyone will work slightly differently. I kind of do bullet points and trigger words to go back to. I'll make sometimes separate notes alongside the notes, certain little things to, pages to reread, sections that I think are very relevant. I'll look at the assignment questions, the assignment guidance as well, and then basically go off that and then target the sections that I need to do, and then effectively just try and work it as best I can. So when I've got all the materials at the end of the course, what I need, and for the assignments, I know what I need to do, I know where the information is, and I've got notes on the areas that I think are going to be applicable.
Now, assessment is one thing that all Open University students will do, but many students who are in prison will handwrite their assignments, which presents a lot of challenges in terms of trying to present it nicely, make sure the spelling and grammar is correct. What advice would you give to students who are handwriting those pieces of assessed work?
Well, a lot of students will use a word processor, and they will use the VC to do assignments on a word processor, but the virtual campus, sorry, yeah. But they may not necessarily be submitted in a electronic format. They may go in a hard copy format. We do get some students who do still handwrite. That's acceptable. They go through. It does take slightly longer because obviously it won't be on the electronic system. We would necessarily just say you may need more time to write your assignment. It may take you longer to do. Obviously, if you need to do a redraft and then retype it up again, it's going to take you longer than it would be if you were doing it on a word processor. So there are difficulties in necessarily, well, I wouldn't say difficulties, I'd say it's, people generally now find it easier to do it on a word processor, but we do get some students who do handwritten, and it's acceptable. And if that's the means they've got, then that's what they have to do, unfortunately.
Brilliant. Now, one final thing I wanted to ask about was that Chris was speaking about the importance of the education manager, and sometimes for pieces of assessment we might get what we call ICMAs, these interactive computer marked assignments, and students in prison would often have those as a printout. So they would need to be mindful of making sure that they submit those by the deadline and that those are posted off. And there has to be, to some extent, that sort of level of responsibility about knowing what your assessment is and making sure you've got it in and got it out within those due deadlines. So in terms of that time management and taking responsibility for learning, what advice can you end on for students?
Well, that is a skill. That is a skill for any student, time management and taking responsibility for their studies. They've registered onto the course, so it's their, and they want to get the betterment from it and benefit from it. So effectively, we would always say that they need to look at the planner, know when things need to be due, make sure that the education manager is aware when they've got assignments due, hand them in on time where possible, and then get them submitted to the university via the education staff. It's just a process of trying to keep on top of what they're doing, but obviously, like any student, things can get in the way. It's then about informing the education manager, who then can inform the tutor if there are any issues, and then working from there to try and catch up and get back up to speed.
So it's knowing your assessment strategy, knowing when you've got to do things by, and taking that responsibility to make sure it's all done. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, well, on that note then, I wonder, Sean, if we could talk to you, because in addition to being one of the team that work with prisons, you're also an OU tutor. So what sort of support can people in prisons expect to get from a tutor?
Well, I've been a tutor for a long time, and I've taught in prison ever since I started working for the Open University. And from the beginning until now, I see my role and what students can expect from me in two different ways. The first is I teach them about the module content and help them to come to a greater understanding of what the module is trying to teach them, and probably more importantly, help them to successfully complete their assignments. And even though that sounds quite straightforward, I see this in two different sections. One of them would be in terms of academic support, and the other would be in terms of pastoral care.
Yeah, because I mean, students will get sent their module materials, and for all intents and purposes, many students very successfully study on their own. But what makes the OU so special is this relationship with a tutor who both provides feedback on work and helps. But I wonder, in a prison environment, then how does that look? I'm assuming you're not going in and teaching them every day, going through the content. So how does it physically happen?
Well, there are 4 different ways that a tutor teaches. The first one would be through face-to-face tuition. Every student it's possible for them to have face-to-face tutorials, but it's not always the case that can be facilitated. So for students in a prison where they can facilitate face-to-face tuition and their tutor can go in to attend, then there are up to 10 hours of support. If that's not possible, then another alternative is phone support, which is very successful. A third option, if neither of those is possible, would be correspondence tuition. And this can be using the contact in the prison that both Chris and Stephen have spoken about, who effectively acts as a link between the tutor and the student. And I regularly get questions by email from the contact that the student has asked. And then obviously the fourth part of tuition is teaching through marking. And the feedback is not just about the module content, but also encouraging students to develop their study skills and helping them to work on things that they need to improve in terms of their essay writing.
So this feedback is really specific for each assignment, for each student. You'll focus on things they've done well on, things they might need to improve on, and again, focusing on clarifying content as well as study skills. And the way that the OU model works is that students might have several of these throughout a module presentation, often things that build on each other. So working with that feedback is really important.
Absolutely. I think the key is at the beginning to work out what the student can realistically improve on between the first essay and the second essay. So there may be several things that the student could work on, but the trick, as far as I'm concerned, is for me to spot the one most important thing for that person to start with. Once they've improved on that, then I'll start to introduce new ways in which that student can improve. And my view is that over the period of the module, I'm encouraging the student to develop their skills, to reach their full potential. And the way I view it is that I then hand over the student to the next tutor in a position where they can successfully complete another module.
And it's all a learning process. I mean, I know that often students think, by the end of this module, I'll be brilliant at this. But as you go throughout year on year of your study, there's always new challenges, as you say. So sometimes it's hard having that feedback, isn't it? Because you think, oh gosh, there's another thing I need to work on improving. But actually, it's all part of becoming a better academic learner.
Well, I've been researching for 25 years and I've never written anything that I was happy with. So there's always room for improvement.
Well, there's a thought. Now, one of the things that we've been talking a little bit about earlier is if things go wrong. So, you know, we were saying that sometimes you might need an extension or some things might happen in life. And that's one thing that the OU is brilliant at, is this idea of flexibility. So your tutor is often a great point of call if things are going wrong. How might that look then?
That's what I meant before when I was talking about pastoral care. I regularly get questions from prisons that are not part of my region as my role as a manager for the Students in Secure Environments team. If I get a question through something about perhaps a disability or the student needs an extension or something along those lines, I would always refer that to the manager responsible for that particular student's home region. And there are named contacts for every single prison in the country.
And again, there are extensions that you can have. It of course depends for the end of module assessment or something at the end of the course that's like an examinable component that goes through exam boards. There's less flexibility, but there are options to take a little bit more time if you need it or get additional support.
Absolutely. And whenever a student experiences difficulties, there is always an opportunity for them to seek support, and we will do absolutely everything we possibly can to make their studies as smooth as is possible.
Brilliant. Well, Sean, Stephen and Chris, thank you so much. It's been great to meet you as part of the team, and thank you for your contributions.
Thanks, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm now joined by Ruth McFarlane, who is another one of the prison education team. And Ruth, we're going to talk about digital study.
Yes, Karen. So we've worked really hard at the OU to develop a secure virtual learning environment which replicates our external, our mainstream virtual learning environment, and it's a really great opportunity for our students in prison to be having access to the digital study materials. This is available via the virtual campus. It should be in all prisons. One of the things I want to do via this programme is to encourage people to be asking. You should be entitled to be using it, to be having access to it. We'd really like our students to be logging in 3 or 4 times a week if they can. And what I want to do now is to show some of the things that are available on the virtual campus.
Brilliant. Well, let's take a look.
Okay. So firstly, the secure VLE, or what we call the virtual campus, this will contain the entire study planner. So all of those printed materials that are sent to students in prison are available online, and students can work their way through on a week-by-week basis. They can access all of the videos and the audio content. They can find their ICMAs. They can find their assignment dates. But all of that content is there in the VLE.
Brilliant. So I guess it makes it a lot easier, instead of it being in an offline pack, to be able to access it there and then, and the order it's presented, often with the activities maybe surrounding the video or the transcript that goes along with it.
That's right. So it'll take the students through each of the activities. Sometimes there'll be activities that people can do online, and it'll take them through and it'll remember where you were up to so that you can carry on through without having to waste your time trying to find your place again. And it's really beautifully structured. So it's very good if people can start to get used to studying digitally. It will really help when people are released from prison, because that will be the expectation. And so, as I say, we're really trying to encourage people to make the most of that if they can.
Brilliant. And you wanted to show us something else as well?
Yes, so the first screen that people will come to, they will access this via the virtual campus. The OU has a little logo on one of the buttons,
Yep.
and you'll come to this login screen. This has lots of extra material which is really useful. So there's some study skills booklets that people can look at, there's a careers workbook, and there's a copy of our prospectus as well, so that people can choose what they're going to move on to next. So don't pause at that do pause at the login screen, sorry, and have a look at the range of materials that are available there. Once people have logged in, they get through to their module website page, and the screen that I really wanted to draw people's attention to is the help screen.
Great, let's take a look.
So the help screen is accessed via the question mark in the top right-hand corner. And this will take people to a computing guide which has been written specifically for students in prison. So it's recognising that students won't have access to the forums or to some of that other communicative content because of security restrictions. HMPPS have asked us to take those bits out. People can study safely, securely, but also have a really good digital experience. But often you don't quite know what's there. So it's worth spending a good hour or so before you start, having a look at that online computing guide and getting to know what's where and how to navigate your way through. Little tricks like bookmarking things so that you can come back and find them later, highlighting things so that you're sort of replicating your paper study experience but on a computer.
And of course, students can submit their ICMAs, the interactive computer marked assignments, through the virtual campus as well, which must be great, knowing it's actually there and being able to do it online.
Exactly, yes. We really would like to encourage students to do that. It means that they haven't got to worry about what Stephen was saying earlier about planning ahead and making sure you send it off a week in advance. It's a real-time submission, and it just means that you're having the same experience as other students. So yes, we really do encourage people to try and do that if they can.
Now, we've spoken about some of the challenges about being a student in prison, but also about some of the rewards. And I've seen many of the reflective components on students who've studied successfully in a prison environment and produced the most incredible work, often accompanied by real life-changing experiences. So can we end by talking about some of the benefits of doing something like this?
Yeah, well, I'm pleased you said that, Karen, because we're so proud of how well our students do. We know that it's an incredibly difficult environment for people to study in, and yet very many of our students do really well. Lots of them get distinctions, and lots of them go on to do really well in their degrees and get a first-class honours degree. Sometimes people don't complete their degree while they're in prison, they complete it once they're released, and very many of our students go on to get a really good, meaningful job which is related to the study that they've done. And in fact, we've got people working in our team who started studying with us while they were in prison, so we're really proud of that as well.
And it's a wonderful, friendly and supportive team also that we've
Definitely.
introduced people to today. Well, thank you very much, Ruth. So studying can be challenging, but ever so rewarding, and you've got it all there. Do take a look out for extra study skills material and support that you can get from the Open University. Good luck in your studies if you choose to progress with the Open University, and thank you for watching.